Good afternoon. Welcome to Senior Circuit. I'm Ashley Speliotis, the director of the Somerville Council on Aging. And I'm here today with Roberta Robinson, the marketing director of Geriatrics at Cambridge Health Alliance. We're very happy and pleased that you could join us this afternoon to talk about the broad topic, always expansive, of mental health, and especially how we can keep our mental health strong and positive in our geriatric or older adult population. So Roberta, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and your goals in your position at Cambridge Health Alliance?
Well, I now work with geriatrics. I have for a while. And in that role, I go out and do community presentations. I do a TV show myself. It's on YouTube. The name of the show is Health is Wealth. I also do a monthly lunch and learn with Cambridge Health Alliance, in which we feature doctors and experts on a variety of different topics. And I've started a new game show for fun. So that happens on an evening, and that really is segues right into mental health because it's a spirit lifter. Music is always good.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And you come to our center in Somerville quite often, right? Once a month to do different topics on mental health and wellness, and have also come to do some special learning opportunities regarding, I always remember the one on staying positive, which happened, I believe, days before the pandemic, which was perfect timing, I would say.
I would say so. And we have to revisit those points again, sort of post-pandemic. I'm not sure if we're quite post yet, but we're getting there. That is really the basis of everything I do, because that's the foundation, because it all goes back to that, right? It all goes back to our perception, how we look at things.
Mm-hmm, right. I think, like, we've just really begun talking, but when people think about mental health, sometimes they think it's so broad a topic and there's so many nuances, or people describe it differently. In your role, your work centers a lot about education and mental health. When somebody comes up to you, how do you describe what is mental health? How would you explain that to someone?
First of all, in the older population, that's what they call us now, older adults. In the older population, there's a stigma. Just with the very words mental health, there's a stigma, and people freeze when they hear that. Right away, they go to the negative side of it, right? They don't want, years ago, if anyone ever suggested you go to a psychiatrist, you went with a bag over your head because you didn't want anyone to see you in there. And when I asked my peeps, and I asked them why, and they say because they would have thought you were crazy. That was the older, but a lot of them still hang on to the stigma, right? Mm-hmm. I like to shine some light on all of these things to eradicate that stigma and normalize it. First of all, the way I look at mental health, we as humans are four-dimensional. We're not one-dimensional. We're not just physical. We're physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. And if any one of those dimensions is out of whack, we're out of whack. And now let me just go to spiritual. Spiritual, that's a term. Spirituality, that's a relatively new term in the last few decades. We didn't grow up with that. Either people were religious or they weren't religious. Spirituality, we never heard the word. But the actual definition of spirituality is interconnectedness. It means that we are connected to every living person as well as every living thing. So we need to be connected. We as humans need to be connected not only to other people, and if we haven't learned that in these last 2 years, how important we are to each other, we will never learn it. I mean, Zoom is great. It's the next best thing. But there is nothing that is a substitute for person-to-person, face-to-face communication, because everything is about energy, and the energy flows then between the people. So mental health for me incorporates everything. It's every single aspect of our life that affects our mental health, right? If we surround ourselves by things we love, we're going to feel more comfortable. We're going to already feel safe, and we're going to feel uplifted. If, so there are, I hope I'm not getting off point with you, but I think it has to do with every aspect of our lives. The physical, we need to take care of our bodies so that we feel better. When we feel better, naturally our mental health is going to be better. And resting is part of that. I don't do that very well, but I do tell my people to make sure, they include the rest, because when we sleep, and if we can get a good sleep, then that's the mode that our body heals it. And when our body feels better, we're going to feel better. Our outlook is going to be better, right? We're going to be more toward the positive and the hopeful side rather than the hopeless side.
Right. I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that our mental health is really how we align ourselves with our inner selves and our outer selves. And we have to look kind of at the broader picture, that it goes beyond our physical health. But are we in positive relationships? Are we in positive relationships with our friends and family? Are we in a spot in life where we want to be? And sometimes, like you were saying, there's a lot of newer concepts like spirituality that are more mainstream. And some people focus on spirituality to help with their mental health. And some people also look at self-care. I feel like you can correct me if I'm wrong, but self-care is we're often hearing about in the news and in the media, and how that affects our mental health. Do you have you seen that a lot in your work, or is that one of newer concepts as well?
Oh no, that's part of it's part of everything, because it's not to be separated. And when I just want to go back to one thing you touched on when you talked about alignment. Now you're in my world. Then but we also have to be in alignment with ourselves. So forgiveness is a huge piece of this. It's my experience that if we live in the past, we're going to conjure up anger and depression. If we live in the future, we're going to conjure up anxiety because we don't know what's going to happen. The only place that we can live is right in this moment. This moment is the only moment that any one of us ever has. And in this moment, life is okay. Life is good, right? The term self-care is another relatively new term. The older population, we never heard that. And when, if someone was taking care of themselves, I mean, my granddaughters have had more manis and petties than I will have in a lifetime. And they're only 8 and 12. But the kids coming up today know how to take care of themselves. We would have looked at that as more of a selfish term, because there was no self-care. We lived in service for others, but it was often at our own expense. And we can still, my work is in service of others, but not at my expense. That's the difference, right? And the good thing is that we can get this at any age. It's just because we have never learned this doesn't mean that we won't learn it. We can start anew and have a new beginning every single moment of every single day. So self-care is getting a good night's rest, is going to your doctor on a regular basis to make sure that there's nothing brewing that shouldn't be brewing, and making sure that all your levels, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your cholesterol is where it's supposed to be. Self-care is connecting with people. It may be a phone call. It may be having a cup of tea. It may be coming to the center, and where groups are there, and different I'm going to be there, but different topics for people to learn that stimulates their mind. That's also part of self-care. Self-care is maybe doing some exercise. The recommendation is 30 minutes a day. But the good news is that they tell me it doesn't have to be done all at one time. So people can do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and 10 minutes, which is not very overwhelming. And we can do some sort of exercise, whether in a chair, a wheelchair, or walking. Walking is excellent. And getting out to nature. Remember I said spirituality is interconnectedness. That means that we are connected to nature. That's why we feel better when we go to the mountains and we go to the ocean and we go to the lake. And even if we go out in the garden, we feel better. So self-care, I think, it's also things like mani-pedis. And if you wanted a massage and you could afford a massage, those are all good things. But you don't have to, you can take care of yourself without spending a lot of money. That's my point.
I think you also made an excellent point when you said that self-care used to be thought of as things that were selfish for you. And I feel like sometimes in the media, people say that, and you just mentioned like that mani-pedi or escaping the house from the kids and doing something to truly treat yourself, when in actuality, self-care is listening to yourself and saying like, I need extra sleep, or I feel better when I walk every day. So you're doing everything to keep you aligned, to keep your mental health in a better state. So I think that's an excellent point, to think of self-care as not that treat all the time, but what we can do to really help ourselves. Because I think we've jumped into it, but what happens when our mental health is not in its best state? Like, what have you seen in your work of what happens to people, or what are some signs that your mental health needs to be the focus at this time?
Well, I think I also wanted to mention one point that I didn't mention, which was also food. Food is getting the proper nutrition and eating well is also part of keeping the body healthy. Keeping the body healthy keeps the mind healthy, right? We're all connected. It's not like we have different compartments. It's like we're connected. Everything is connected to everything. And I think the mental health piece, it's listening to ourselves, it's treating ourselves. It might be just buying some flowers for ourselves and giving ourselves a little boost, or reading a book, or connecting with someone. I think it is part of it needs to be part of what we do on a daily basis. We are in more control than we know of. And if we eat well and treat our bodies well, we fuel our bodies with the things that help our bodies, right? Just like a car. If you have water in the gas tank, you're going to get cough, cough, sputter, sputter. You may get where you're going, or you may not. And it's the same with the nutrition in our bodies, right? So we want to be able to, and no one but ourselves controls what we put in our mouths. We can't blame it on anybody else, right? We are the ones, and we can, if we work to keep the inflammation down in our bodies, we're going to feel better. Our bodies aren't supposed to have inflammation or infection. We need to, but eating well, resting well, getting some exercise. Also, exercise, that's a good point. Laughing and exercise. The brain emits a chemical substance called endorphins. Endorphins are the body's natural tranquilizers. So even though we might complain, and we do, about exercising, we really feel better when we do. But sometimes we're lazy and we say, oh, I'm too tired, I'm this, I'm that, and we don't do it, right? But when we do it, we feel better. We're energized. We have more energy to do the things we want to do. And keeping our mental health, it's an outlook. Positive thinking, you mentioned that, which is one of my favorite topics. If we look at the glass half full instead of half empty, if we can live in this present moment, whatever has happened in the past has to stay in the past. There is not one thing we can do to change it. We need to find a way to make peace with it. What happens in the future, We don't know. We can do the best that we can to make our plan for the future, but the bottom line is we never know what the next moment is going to bring. So we need to that causes stress and anxiety. We need to reel ourselves back into this present moment. And in this present moment, when we really look around, and most people look around, and if they're in front of me, I know they're doing okay in that moment. Right. And so if we can look at that, the other thing I just want to mention quickly, if we are and of course, in this whole pandemic, anxiety and depression ran rampant. We couldn't even find a therapist for people that needed therapy if they weren't already connected to a therapist, because the therapists were maxed out. They were overwhelmed, not only with people, but with also healthcare providers because of all the incredible losses that they were witnessing every single day. But anxiety and depression, it rolls in fast. Depression rolls in very fast. We start isolating, we're going to get depressed. We start sitting in one place, usually in front of the television, which doesn't have a lot of uplifting things, unless you're watching a Hallmark movie, and I highly recommend it. Then, we're sitting in one spot. If we're focused on the news, it can help raise our anxiety level. Our muscles turn to jello very quickly. We become a fall risk. So the snowball goes in a downward spiral, and really very quickly, which is why
I just want to stop you there because I think you touched on a very interesting point that we've also heard multiple times throughout the pandemic of that anxiety for the next month, the next year, and also depression. And I think it would do our residents service to just kind of go through what are some symptoms of depression, and when would you feel like, beyond the self-care techniques and beyond what we can do for ourselves, when would you seek treatment at a doctor's office or with a therapist?
So I think if people, and I'm still finding people that are not going to primary healthcare providers, and that's a dangerous thing, because you need to be connected to a primary healthcare provider, PCP, right? And hopefully you are connected to a primary healthcare provider that you have a good relationship with and you can talk things over with. If you're feeling down, if you're feeling disconnected, it's always good to mention it sooner rather than later. They could recommend some things or some program or even maybe a low-grade medication for people, depending. And of course, I work with the Cambridge Health Alliance. Of the Alliance, we have so many layers of mental health providers. We have mental health liaisons who have the time and the ability to speak with people at a longer time, and connect them to the mental health providers. We have case managers, we have social workers, we have psychologists and psychiatrists. We have the whole range. We have adult, we have geriatric, we have adolescent, we have it all at the Alliance. And so it's never, I'd say it's never too early to discuss some of these things. If you have one of those providers, if you have a social worker, if you have a case manager, even social workers at the center, it's open up, share your feelings with one of those providers. And sometimes, just they say, and just opening your mouth and sharing your feelings cuts the burden, the heaviness right in half. It's right. You're too young, you might not remember this expression, but there was an expression, getting it off your chest, getting things off your chest. Another way is to write it out. You can write your feelings out. Right? And you can have a little ceremony. You can say anything you want. No one ever has to read it. But it's a good way to get things out, because if we hold things in and stuff them, and the older population is very good at that, because there was no arena for us to open up. And so, we had expressions like, don't air your dirty laundry and keep your chin up and pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. There was no time or venue for us to feel bad and maybe get help. There just wasn't,
Right.
and so I think maybe the older population is a little,
Mhm.
first of all, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And that's why we're doing the show. And then secondly, I think it's maybe that stigma again, that you don't want to open up because you're afraid of being judged, or that's why it's excellent to talk to someone that sometimes doesn't know you very well, like family or friends, because there is no judgment. They're
Mhm.
just listening, and they're there to help you always.
And
And
I think you made just an excellent point where you said that it's never too early to speak up. It's never too early to tell your family, to tell your friends, to tell your PCP or a social worker, mental health professional in the community, because I think we've seen, as we're trying to combat this stigma of surrounding our mental health, that people don't experience everything exactly the same, but there are commonalities among us, and there are commonalities among our community, and that there is help out there. There's help at our center, there's help at Cambridge Health Alliance and other providers throughout Somerville and throughout the state. And I think, like you said, there's so many levels. There's levels with focusing on self-care. There's levels with focusing on our physical health, on our spirituality, on mindfulness, which we didn't mention quite yet. But there's also that spot to look and to focus with a mental health professional, which can also be very beneficial. I know we only have a few moments left, and I touched on that broad subject of mindfulness. Would you like to touch on that a little bit as well?
I would. So mindfulness is just being in tune with what you're doing, basically. Instead, the way I describe it to the people that can understand, when you're not being mindful, and probably in the pandemic, we were guilty of maybe taking, say, a box of Oreos in, and we're watching TV, and we're having one, and we're having one, and we're having one, and then we reach in and we find out there's no more left, because we have been eating them mindlessly. We weren't paying attention to what we were doing. So mindfulness comes into all of the things that we've talked about, are basically incorporated under the umbrella of mindfulness. Eating well, paying attention. You could have the treats once in a while. I'm not saying don't have the treats, but don't have the treats as a steady diet. Have the treats as a treat and not a steady diet. Get some exercise, stay connected with people, pay attention to your habits, and, to what we do. There is Massachusetts. We have incredible resources in the state, and even in the cities, and in the city of Somerville and surrounding cities, there are incredible resources. But people can't help people unless they know that they're suffering with something, right? So sometimes if you're crying all the time, if you're sleeping all the time, if you're have no energy all the time, those are good points and good reasons to speak to someone, your primary healthcare provider. And your primary healthcare provider today navigates you through the entire healthcare system. So they are the gateway, if you will. And so if you don't have a good relationship with your primary care provider, get a new one, because you need to have a good relationship with them. In my experience with the docs at CHA, which is why I'm here for 15 years, actually, they're so approachable, and they're so easy with the patients, and they're so available to the patients. And we have so many different layers. If the doctor is too busy, then there are all the layers that I described. Where they're all there to help the people, but the people have to do their job and reach out.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to that saying that there's just never too early to start focusing more on our mental health, to start focusing on our spirituality, our mindfulness, our self-care, how it all interplays with one another. And like we mentioned before, you're at our center one Tuesday a month to talk about all things mental health and wellness. So we are very happy that you can join us that one morning. And if folks would like some more information or to join that group, they can call the center, or I believe they can reach right out to you at Cambridge Health Alliance directly. Is that right, Roberta?
Of course they could. Yep. But I think you put it in the newsletter. Don't you put it in your newsletter as well?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. About your programs here.
So it's the second Tuesday of every month that I'm either there. I've been on Zoom because of the pandemic, but now I'm going to be, I think alternating actually. And, it's amazing. I think because people have that stigma of mental health, and they don't realize that all of the things that we've spoken about this morning affect our mental health, then I think maybe they would, if we could just get them, and hopefully they'll watch the show and they will be enlightened a little bit that there's no shame. I want to make that clear. There is no shame. There is no judgment. There's no one can help you unless we know you're suffering.
Absolutely. Yes, and thank you, Roberta, so much for joining us. And to all the viewers out there, we will see you next month on Senior Circuit.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, Ashley. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.